Okay. All right. Good afternoon to everybody who just joined. Again, I hope your break was restful. It certainly went fast. I didn't get everything I wanted to do done, but then we never do. But I was grateful for the time anyway. Um, where is it? There. Um, there is a study guide in Canvas, and it is very long. So I want to see if you all can download it. If you cannot download it, then I will submit it as an assignment folder, but let me know if you can open it and download it on your own without me doing. So what, so what you want to do is you want to go to, we have been looking at the unit on living world and biodiversity. So we want the last module in that unit is a study guide. And they have listed all of the topics. So you can actually click on each individual topic, but there's also a study guide down here. So if you click on the bottom study guide, you actually get a downloadable copy of all of those things. And as you can see, there's a lot of topics that were covered in this particular unit. So I want you to let me know if you can open this and we'll start talking about it. We're going to do a unit test, so I'm going to abbreviate this quite a bit, and we'll do that on Wednesday. And then after Wednesday, for you would be Friday, we'll start preparing for the end of, you can open it. Thank you. Okay, good. All right. So yeah, this is a downloadable copy now. We're not going to do for this particular one on Wednesday, because we have a short period, it's not going to be an AP format. It's just going to be a multiple choice test on these topics. But the final exam for this class is the 13th. Okay, so second and sixth is on December 13th. So after Wednesday, I'll have a abbreviated study guide for you, because this will be a unit test. So for that, we want to go back and look at everything from the beginning. And so everything from the beginning means that we're going to start looking at introduction to ecosystems, different types of biomes, the different cycles that we went through, productivity, trophic levels, energy levels, food chains, food webs, and then um, since we're going to do a separate test on this unit, on Living World, there won't be that many questions on it, maybe one or two. So the bulk of the test will be on the other topics that we did earlier in the year. So not doing, I don't think this is, let's see, did you all have this? That's just general information, even though it is published. The actual test is going to actually start from Living World. Okay. So that's just a heads up as to where we're going for the end of the semester. So there is no new information as after today. You want to make sure that you've done all your AP classroom assignments. Those need to be up to date. And again, for Wednesday, we're just doing whoops, I went too far. We're just doing a unit test on the living world. So the study guide that you have just opened up covers all of these topics. Okay. Alrighty. So we can go back in and I think almost everybody's here. But take a few minutes to look at that while I do attendance, and then we'll come back and kind of just do a hit and miss on what's important, what's not important, but start from here. Um, you definitely want to know your vocabulary. Okay, so you need to know what biodiversity is and what are the factors that affect biodiversity. And I always say it's a good tip is to look at the essential questions. So test questions will definitely be based on what was the essential topic that you needed to know for that section. So take a minute to look at those while I stop sharing and do attendance. Was there anybody who um, was not able to open the study guide to download it? I got one person who told me, yes, I can, but I didn't get anybody else saying that they couldn't. All right, so you start there. I will do attendance and then I'll get back with you. We're still missing half the class at the moment. All right. So even though we're still missing quite a few people, we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, if you're on this first page at the beginning, biodiversity, we not only do you need to understand what the term means, because it's basically going to come up in a lot of the topics that we do for the year, but it's just diversity means a variety, and the bio part means a living things. So we're looking at the variety of living things that are on the earth and why we have this variety. So we have three reasons why we have this variety, or three factors that are important to keeping this variety going. And one of them is genetic diversity. So there, I don't know if you remember back from biology that you have your DNA, and DNA codes for all of the characteristics that all living things have. So what the different types of genes that are available will determine what kind of diversity that you have. The last thing we looked at before the break was we were looking at the Galapagos Islands and why we were looking at finches and why there's a variety of finches there. And a lot of that had to do with mating. When organisms adapt, certain characteristics in the environment will select for that particular characteristic to be continued. And if only the organisms with that characteristic remain alive, then they're the only ones who are going to reproduce. And so we get a whole new population based on the organisms with the characteristics that survive the conditions of that environment. So this is where we get genetic variation as far as populations are concerned. Species. So again, if we're looking at, and then going back to reviewing, we were talking about ecosystems, the hierarchy of things on the planet is the whole planet is our biosphere. And the biosphere is made up of different ecosystems. And then the different ecosystems have, and I'm starting from the top, moving down into specializing. Um, then we go from ecosystems, then we go to communities. But so our ecosystem included talking about our living things and non-living things, our biotic and our abiotic factors. Then we get to community, we're only talking about the organisms themselves that exist in there. Communities have several, coming down the list again, to populations. If populations are specific to one group of organisms. And within that population, when we're talking about one organism, we're talking about a species. So for example, in a community, you can have several populations of organisms living in that one spot. And then we look at that one population of organisms, but there can be some variety, like we were talking about the finches in that population of birds. And then if we look at just one, there were different species of finches. So we can look at just that one particular kind of organism in that population, in that community, in that ecosystem, in the biosphere. So that's our levels of organization as far as living things are concerned. Um, You need to know species are defined as individuals that can mate and reproduce with one another. So how we know something is a different species is they tend not to be able to reproduce with each other. So that's how you get that. All right, so our biodiversity depends on an area having different numbers, a diverse number of species. We don't want to have just one species living in that area. We want a variety of species living in that area. Then we have our third factor, which is habitat. And Surviving depends on the habitat. Can you survive the conditions of that habitat? So, for example, not all looking at this particular habitat, not all organisms are designed to survive in a desert type habitat. These plants are, but not all. A uh, Christmas tree, our spruce trees and ferns, and they're not designed to survive here. So this would eliminate that species from this habitat. All right, this is more like a rainforest, but everything is not those that um, don't require much water probably would die with having too much water because this one has an abundance of moisture going on. This is your rainforest kind of atmosphere, and not everything is adapted to live here, plant or animal. So the habitat um, dictates what, how much diversity you're going to have in a given area. Okay, that one's the desert again. Why is it back on desert? Oh, okay. I skipped the first one. The first one uh, is more a terrestrial. This is kind of aquatic, if you ask me. There's more water here than land. But then it's rocky mountains. Not everything is designed to live in that type of environment. All right, this is your aquatic environment. And obviously, everything can't live underwater in the water. And even here, there are certain corals don't live everywhere. So these are coral reefs. So the organisms that like the areas with coral reefs, you'll find them close to this habitat. This is our forest habitat. And again, you have what we call a canopy layer, which kind of dictates what's growing on the ground because the canopy blocks the light for things that are growing underneath. So this is different to um, the rainforest situation. And there is a difference between jungles and forests. Jungles are more don't have as much canopy so that you can have a lot of intense ground vegetation. Whereas a forest, because the treetops have the canopy that usually blocks out the light, there isn't a lot of ground vegetation. You can walk through a forest. Jungles, you kind of have to beat your way through because light can get through and things will grow more spread out in a jungle. So there is a difference between a jungle and a forest. All right, and this is your mountains. This is more like a tundra area where you have high mountains with icy caps, and not everything is going to grow there. So they call that permafrost, areas with permafrost and tundra. Okay, so you can go through those to look at um, what populations are. And again, go through and look at these essential knowledge topics. Okay. There's environmental stressors. That's a vocabulary word, so make sure you know what that is. And again, going back up to looking, it's to the topic that we ended up talking about, survival of the fittest. Can you survive the environmental stressors? Okay. Alrighty, let's look at the next one. And like I said, the study guide has a lot of topics on it. So we're mostly going to focus on whatever the essential question is. Because like I said, we don't have a whole lot of time on Wednesday, so it's not going to be a very long test, but it's going to be very comprehensive. All right, so for this one, we're looking at services. So we have our acronym for some of the services. So habitat destruction, uh, you have, what is it? It's conversion, fragmentation, degradation of the natural habitats by human activities. such as deforestation and urbanization, mining and agriculture. So things that we do to the environment that cause destruction. Okay, we're not talking about hurricanes and earthquakes and tornadoes and things like that. Things that we do, and we do a good job of uh, disturbing the environment, all in the name of trying to make a better life for ourselves. So they cut down the forests in order to provide lumber. They cut down certain areas in the South America. They're clearing the rainforests so that they can have farmland, so that they can grow crops and raise cattle so that they can feed the people. And all of that sounds very good, except that we need the oxygen from the trees. And so we start cutting, and we need the trees to absorb the carbon dioxide. So all of that has to be balanced out with what are we doing in the name of trying to save human race as opposed to destroying the planet. Okay. And that all ties into urbanization. We want to build our houses, so we need to cut down the trees because we need the lumber to build the houses. Mining, we need the minerals. Certain minerals are used for making appliances and wires and things of that nature. So we disturb the land. Mining um, is digging, usually clears off all the land on top of the area, and then they dig, and then when they dig, they disturb all of that land, and they seldom put it back. Okay, so they've destroyed whole areas in the name of mining, um, just to get the minerals. And again, we need the minerals, we need the coal, we need these things in order to stay alive, but we have destroyed the environment in that area. So again, we have to balance that out. Again, we clear cut so that we can grow farmland because we need to grow the cattle and we need to grow the food so that we can feed. So again, it's kind of a dilemma. All right, invasive species. We did a short project on what's an invasive species. We talked about kudzu. Kudzu was brought in kind of as a quick growing crop so that they could feed the animals, but they didn't take into account that it takes over wherever it is. And so it limits the natural species that are supposed to be there. They compete down here. It says they outcompete the natural organisms that are supposed to live there, and they alter the ecosystem in that area. Sometimes they spread disease. Organisms, they have zebra mussels. They those overgrow in an area and they feed out the organisms that the mussels that are native to that area. Okay, so invasive species are a problem. Population growth, we need to look at growth curves for human population. And then the vocabulary for density. Density means that there's more people in given areas. Population growth increases the demand for natural resources, such as, and so communities tend to, you have populations tend to be where the natural resources are, where you get food, water, and energy. And again, weighing things out. Why is it a problem? Why are we concerned about the population growing? It's because of the kind of pressure that it puts on the environment. Okay, pollution. A lot of our industrialization creates waste products. Everything we do creates, everything we make creates a waste product. And up until recently, we hadn't been considering what to do with the waste products, and now we are. So now there's a big push for recycle, reuse, so that we are not just dumping things everywhere. We're not polluting the air and creating a situation where the earth becomes uninhabitable. because of pollution. We talked about the biochemical cycles, the carbon cycle, oxygen cycle, water cycle, nitrogen cycle, all of those cycles we talked about. So they have a lot to do with pollution. Climate change, a lot of that has to do, will lead to climate change. So this particular chart right here kind of covers a lot of this unit. So it's shortened here, but it touches on all of the topics that we talked on in this unit. So, for example, the greenhouse effect is affected by deforestation. Um, we're cutting down the trees and altering the habitat of the wildlife. And, and because we're altering the climate, we're having this year, extreme weather events. We're having not only having hurricanes, but more intense hurricanes, causing more devastation than it's ever caused before. We had an extremely hot summer. Okay. It set records this year, and they're looking for the winter to also be extreme. It was, and it's extreme. Like Georgia seems to be in a unique little pocket that we don't get as the kind of extremes that everybody else is getting, but where they had tremendous snowfall and then had to deal with the melting of the snow causing flooding because it melted. We didn't have all of that. So, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. And the last one, overexploitation, excessive use of natural resources by human activity, overfishing, overhunting, over logging, overdoing everything. Again, all in the name of having products. We want to hunt so that we can have more skins to sell or trophies to sell, because we're not necessarily hunting for food. Overfishing so that we can sell more fish in the market, have bigger lobsters and all that sort of thing. Logging, again, the housing industry is growing off the charts, so they need logs for that. And mining, as we talked about before, because you need the materials, the minerals that you mine up. So it becomes a problem when we overdo it. So there are some limits. There are seasons for hunting, there are seasons for fishing, because we're now learning that overdoing it is not a good thing. More is not better when it comes to the environment. So we are balancing our activities by creating seasons, hunting seasons, fishing seasons, because we have to allow time for these organisms to reproduce and grow back. All right, so again, look at the exam tips for that one. All right, and we spent all that time and that was just unit 2. Okay, what is island bio? So know what that is. We looked at our barrier islands. So Georgia is a unique location too, because we are a large landmass, but we also have a lot of what we call barrier islands. So you all did projects on that, and hopefully you all actually read some of the other folks' projects, because I'll ask some questions about that. All right, tolerance. Tolerance refers to the range of conditions such as temperature, salinity, flow rates, sunlight, and organisms sunlights that organisms can endure before injury or death. Okay, so tolerance. How when you know this map, range of tolerance and tolerance zones. So there are certain conditions in an area where there are no organisms, few organisms, areas where there are many organisms, and then you have that downside again. So there's kind of a middle zone as far as where are organisms going? What is the range of an environment that produces the most number of organisms? Or these over here where there are few, it's, the conditions, and these are the conditions. You need to know what the conditions are. Temperature, salinity, how salty is the water? pH, acid or basic is the water? Oxygen levels, can they breathe? Okay, so that's the important part of this one. Knowing what the abiotic conditions are in which a species can survive and for the population to grow and flourish. Okay. Okay, natural disturbances. So before we talked about human disturbances, and now that we're looking at the ones that nature causes, forest fires, storms, seasonal variations that lead to short-term disruptions. Although that last hurricane, Helen, people in North Carolina is talking of, and other areas are talking about it's going to take them years to repair the damage that that hurricane has caused. But we need to look at what are the disturbances that come. So here are the things you need to focus on as far as the disturbances that you're going to get. You're going to loss of biomass, that's food, and animals that a lot of the cattle and crop were destroyed during these kinds of natural disasters, which leads to what's going to show up at the grocery store. Okay. And what happens there is they tend to, because there's a little bit available, they tend to jack the prices up on what they do have. Um, Alteration of the physical and chemical properties of the environment. The acidity of the soil can change due to fire or flood, or um, the floods may have washed away all the nutrient layers of the soil. There are different layers of the soil. We haven't talked about that yet, but your topsoil is your nutrient layer, and that's where everything grows best. Well, if you have a tornado, it's going to take away the topsoil. If you have a flood, it's going to take away the topsoil. So it's not going to allow you to be able to, as soon as it leaves, because that event was short-lived, but the aftermath of that short-lived event is I can't grow crop. I can't raise cattle here. So those disturbances are kind of lingering disturbances to a short-term event. Okay, and so which again will disturb the nutrient cycle. Water purification. There's some places that don't have clean running water right now because of this event that we just had, and it blew everything all over everything. So pollution, houses were destroyed, so you have to remove all of the debris that is left from these events. So short-term disruptions cause long-term alterations to your ecosystem. Okay. Um, Look at that. Okay, then look at all of the long-term things. Okay. So know your short-term and long-term effects. Okay. That's what I want you to look at that. Um, Understand what is climate change, understand what sea level changes. All of that is we so they are quite worried with the glaciers melting and adding more water. And when sea level rises, it takes up the land part. So where we had, they're worried about Florida being underwater. They're worried about the coastline of Georgia too. All of the coastline states. Um, if the water rises, the shore level will come in a little bit. So we could lose a lot of our coastal area if the water rises. Florida is very flat, so they're worried about Florida being totally underwater. Things like that nature when sea level rises. So they are concerned about that. So make sure you look over those again. Make sure that you look at the questions, the essential questions that are associated with that. Okay. All right. So this brings us back to our conversation about survival of the fittest. We can, okay, that was just a short. Okay. Certain organisms, when we talk about anatomical adaptations, there are certain organisms that have body parts or things about their physical appearance that allow them to adapt to certain conditions. Um, Scales have allow fish to survive, but it also scales and thorns and things like that cause certain organisms to survive because nobody can deal with those. There are only certain organisms that can get past scales, that can get past thorns. So if you can get past, like a cactus has quills on it, so if you can survive all of that. Sea anemone have stinging cells. Only certain organisms can survive stinging cells. Like Nemo, the clownfish, they are adapted to be um, what do we call it, immune to the sting of the sea anemone, so they can live inside a sea anemone because that stinging cell doesn't bother them. It bothers other organisms, but it doesn't bother them. So they have anatomical adaptations that allow them to survive their area, not be preyed upon, or allows them to survive the conditions that they live in. Coloration is usually refers to being able to blend in with their environment so nobody sees them there and they can live in peace and harmony because nobody sees them. All right. So then you have the poisonous ones, physiological. Let me go back over here. You have physiological things about their chemical nature. So you have body parts that allow them to adapt. You have where they might create chemicals. They don't smell good. They don't taste good. So nobody's going to bother them. They know that if with venom, organisms quickly learn that if this one bites, I die. So they learn. So that allows them to adapt. Certain behaviors allow them to adapt. If they hibernate, they survive the weather conditions by going somewhere and staying out of sight until the conditions are favorable again. Or they fly, they migrate to an area that is suitable, and then they come back when the place that they like to live in has better conditions, or they only exist during the night, or they only exist during the day. So these are adaptations behaviorally. All right. So that's that. Again, make sure that you look at these. Okay, succession. Like I said, this was a very long unit. It covered a lot of stuff. So with this, you need to just basically know, for the purposes of our exam, you need to know the difference between primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession starts when there's absolutely nothing and you're starting life from scratch, from bare rock. And you move from bare rock to once there's weathering and the rocks are breaking down, it kind of creates a little bit of soil. So you have very short plants, what we call very short vascular things, mosses and um, lichens and things of that that don't have very large roots, so they can, if they get a little bit of water, they can survive on the rock environment. But what they do is they also add to the breaking down of the rock environment. And when they die, they add a little fertilization to that area. So then you get the next stage where you've created some soil because of decomposition of the rock and the moss and things of that nature. So you get some soil. And then when you get soil, you can have tall grass. And then when you get grass, they do some more breaking down and create more fertile area. And the more fertile area you get, the bigger the trees can be, the bigger the bushes can be. So they've created nutrients until you get to a situation where we call it climax community, where you can have large trees to grow. And that's when we say climax community, that's usually the end. Okay, whatever happens in that area, that's the height of production, productivity for that area. Secondary succession happens to a climax community where some natural disturbance happened and it wiped everything clean. But when in wiping everything clean, it doesn't take away the soil. So because of the soil is already there, so it might have wiped away the vegetation, but it leaves behind soil, naked soil. So because the soil remains, you're not starting from scratch. So the mosses will grow back quickly, the grass grows back quickly. So the timeline here is usually a few years in recovery. Okay, whereas the other one up top probably took hundreds of years to progress to. This one, as you see from the timeline at the bottom, can happen over a couple of years, 10 or 15 years. Tall trees typically take a long time, but this secondary succession leads to a quick recovery and is always caused by some type of natural disturbance. Okay, so that's what you need to know about that. Keystone, these are vocabulary. You need to know what a keystone species is, and that's uh, they are the ones that have the most impact on an area. So if we remove that species from that area, it alters everything. Okay, let's look at some examples. Okay. I believe you all did a study on Yellowstone National Park, where they introduced the wolves and what happened to all the other vegetation when the wolves got introduced. It changed the deer population and the other populations that were there. So removing them allowed the deers to come back. It allowed the grass to grow because uh, it affected all the different areas. Okay, so it says drastically in the Midwest, the wolves drastically reduced, have been drastically reduced, causing a problem of deer population growing and eating too many plants. So when they sent them back, they balance out the deers and the grass can grow again and so on and so forth. Otters. And this, so we're looking at different environment. This would be an aquatic environment. Sea urchins in a kelp forest, and kelp is those big, if you look in the water, they look like big underwater trees. Sea urchins eat kelp and sea otters eat sea urchins. And the sea otters are removed from the ecosystem as the sea urchin population grows out of control, eating too much kelp and endangering the entire kelp industry because they're not the only ones that eat kelp. Okay, there are other organisms that eat kelp, but um, this sets off an imbalance for the other organisms. Otters are fine. All right, starfish eat mussels. When the starfish are removed from the environment, the mussels outcompete other species growing on the rocky shores, disrupting the environment. Okay, So make sure that you've taken a look at those so understand what a keystone species is and what it how it might alter um, the environment for other species. Pioneer members are always the first organisms to occupy a habitat over time. Okay, and this is just further conversation about succession, primary and secondary succession. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking there and give you a chance to look these over for yourselves. Again, hopefully you were able to download the study guide so that you don't have to keep going through this because the study guide broke each one down into topics as well. Okay, so it does this for you. And if you couldn't download it, well, then it's the same thing as clicking on all of these. Okay, so do not pay any attention to this part here about your test is not going to be like that. An AP test will be like that, but not this one on Wednesday. Okay, because you don't have 90 minutes, you have an hour. All right. You have any questions for me? Like I said, I'm going to stop talking, let you spend the other time catching up on anything that might be missing. All grades need to be in today or before tomorrow. There's no new information after today. Um, and then we just prepare for the final exam, final term exam for Friday. Okay, if you set something in over the break, I'm going to look at it now. No, there'll be no new assignments. Um, all the assignments that you have are already done. So like I said, the next assignment is this unit test for tomorrow. Um, after that, we'll spend each class going over past material until your exam on and we only have Friday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So that's 3 classes. The next 3 classes we'll go over as much material on the study guide as we can for the test on next Friday. So again, if you haven't seen the exam schedule, second and sixth period are scheduled for December the 13th. First and fifth are the 12th. Third period is on the 16th and fourth period is on the 17th. No, just one test. So there's this test, this unit, like I said, I'm gonna try to shorten it as much as possible because it's very long. That's tomorrow. And then I might have one or two questions because this unit is so long and we'll have just tested it. There won't be a lot of repeat questions about this unit. There'll be the test on the 13th. We'll have more questions about the other topics, but there will be just one test tomorrow on biodiversity. That's all that's on the test tomorrow. And then the other tests will cover everything. Okay? I will check that right now. I'm also checking your other assignments that you have submitted. All right, so again, you all make sure that you have um, for AP Classroom, you should have done 2.2, 3, and 4. And five. Okay, Sadie, I think I got you all up to date. Folks, keep in mind that when you turn in late assignments, Canvas takes a few points off for late. And sometimes I have to override that, otherwise it would give you a zero, but it's still late. But I prefer you to have a grade rather than a zero. So please always try to make up any zeros that you have. Okay, so if you have no questions for me, I'm good, and I'll see you all tomorrow.